Leaving the marina, we had full water, full fuel, bunch of gear on board, 7 people. And in this fairly calm situation, we were just motoring along at 5.2 knots at 1200 RPM. Later, we had the boat at 7.3 knots at 25 or 2600 RPM. And then when we had some seas offshore, we were doing 6.2 at 2300 RPM. Maximum RPM on the engine is 3600. 80% of that would be 2880, and I suspected the boat would be doing around 9 knots at that RPM. The main on this boat is a Doyle Stratus 30% square top. It has a standard halyard. Rather than having a halyard lock at the top, there is a stopper at the base of the mast. So the halyard is a little bit larger than a halyard lock halyard, but it does work effectively and is more traditional for those of you that want that. Sail is brought up using the slower speed on the winch. It didn't take too much time at all. And we also found when you're lowering the main, it sort of self-folds except for the last 3 or 4 feet or so. All of the mainsail control lines are brought aft to the starboard helm. This includes the line for the halyard lock, which is a trip line. The Traveler is controlled from either helm, as is the dagger board, controlled from either helm with up and down buttons. Here we see the overlapping jib or the sullen. That's on the forestay. On these commissioning days, we were more testing the rig than looking for speed, but we were able to get between 76 and even 90% of wind speed with the Solent. And if you look at the VPP, these numbers are really close to what has been predicted so far. We'll see here that the drum for the furler is a fairly standard drum with one line. It's part of the forestay, so the Solent stays up. You also find that the Solent is a pretty powerful sail for the boat, and I found this to be true with the HH50 and the HH55. The staysail is self-tacking or self-tending and has a curved staysail track forward of the mast. And because it's forward of the mast, it allows very tight sheeting angles. It's almost a blade. Very easy sail to handle, and it's a one-line sheeting system. The staysail normally stores inside one of the lockers or on the tramp with a UV protected cover. It's up to you whether you want to leave it rigged all the time, but if you do, you'll need to roll or furl both the reacher and the Solent to tack it if you were going to do that. The furler for the reacher, you'll notice that the lines aren't moving. That way you can unfurl it rather rapidly without the line pulling through the drum. This is a cableless reacher. It is nearly masthead, and it's adjusted by the downhaul that goes through a series of blocks that goes back to the longeron where there's a track and a winch. So you control the shape by tightening on the downhaul. In fairly light air with a variety of people at the helm following no specific course, we saw about 76% of wind speed on this day. Overall, with the 4 sails, we were pleased with the cut and the shape. And the next thing to try, of course, would be a asymmetrical spinnaker. If you can excuse all the commissioning clutter, we'll move inside. We're just moving along right now about 6 or 7 knots off the wind with the reacher, headed back towards Fort Lauderdale. It's pretty stable, calm. There's no noise from the dagger boards or no crosswake between the hulls coming up and slapping the bridge deck. The only thing I really hear are the fans, just ever so slightly in the B&G compartments, because they do have cooling fans. I hear the water off the transom, which is just alternating between the different hulls. This is the dagger board trunk. On some cats, performance cats, you'll hear that dagger board going clunk, clunk, clunk. and drive you nuts, especially at night. But you don't hear it on this boat. There's very, very close tolerances between the lower bearing and the top. So there's no noise. The other thing that people bring up is how loud is a carbon fiber boat down below? So I'll be quiet just for a second. All you hear is water. There's no loud drum noises. There's no pounding. It's no different than any monohull or other cat you've been on. We're just motoring about 2250 right now with the Beta 38s, and of course they're behind the cabin, not underneath of me. And it's quiet in here enough that I can speak normally, and there's no reverberation or any vibration of any of the panels. You might have experienced in some charter boats that the heads, especially the forward heads, vibrate and everything kind of moves around and all this stuff shakes. So we're just moving again about 2250 RPM, about 7 knots or so, and the boat is not shaking and vibrating or making any strange noises. One of my favorite parts of this boat is the way the seat is configured. So you can imagine yourself on watch, just keeping track of everything. I have a pretty good view, watching my instruments. Everything's on autopilot, and this is really comfortable. We've adjusted the wheel pressure to about 1.6 pounds, and that's including both of the autopilot arms on there. So just under 2 pounds of pressure. So you can see that we're moving along at about 14 knots of wind right now. We're close to 10 knots. We're heading wind with the Solent, and I just have my forefinger steering the boat. You'll see 2 B&G controls here for autopilots. Well, that's because there are 2 B&G autopilots on board. 2 totally redundant systems with 2 arms. Because it's a catamaran, you can't put a wind steering on the back because it's just too fast, so we rely on the autopilot, so having 2 is a really good idea. The outboard winches on the boat are Harken 50 2-speeds. If you put a 60 series here, then you have a couple of options. You have an option to use your reacher sheet coming up here, which is very handy to have. The other thing is if you use this for a deck chute, if you get the deck chute option, you want to have a higher speed, larger winch for that because it has to work pretty quickly. And it's another thing to consider too if you're using the extended longeron, because you're going to have a variety of sails that might be controlled from the block that's down here up to here. This is if you decide to be more single-handed. Otherwise, you use the 60 series that's down on the in the cockpit that we have for reacher winches currently. But if you want to be able to do it while you're steering, then consider upgrading this to a 60. We took down the staysail just to have a little bit better air on the reacher and also on the Solent we were testing. You'll find that if you do take down the sails that you don't need, you gain a half a knot on the boat. So if you're really tweaking, that's great. But if you're just cruising, and you're not really caring about that too much, you could leave all 3 up. But remember, you're roller furling your inner sails in order to jibe or to tack. You know, I found that this martingale here is a nice thing to hold on to. It's got wide cross beam and a flat longeron, so it's easy to walk on the carbon fiber parts of the boat. And the net on this one is a sort of a tight mesh, and we've had some dogs on board, and their paws have had no problems on it. This particular boat has the twin opening hatches versus the larger Wabasco, but inside the cabin that acts like a ram, and it does a very good job letting in air. Plus, it also is a ram versus the Wabasco, which opens straight. So you would almost think that it lets in more air than the sliding hatch does, and you don't have a large hatch that you have to deal with, and you can close them individually. Here in southern Florida, we could easily have the air conditioners on, but instead today, if we wanted to, we could simply open these up. And it really puts a lot of air in the cabin. But it's going to be rough, so today I am going to close it, but since we're not running air conditioners, if you're just doing a normal cruise, you just leave all 3 of these windows open and it will aerate the cabin pretty well. You'll notice the dinghy's not bouncing all over the place. It's compressed up against the davits themselves, so they're contact points, so you don't have to add separate straps. It's ready to go in the water like that. off the wind here. We're doing 7.5 and about 13, just casually making our way to Fort Lauderdale. Pretty stable. Doing 8. Yeah. All right. We're making the helmsman honest now. We're doing 8 knots. And it's, you can see it's pretty flat. It's not a lot of wind out. 8.5. Oh, 8.5. Now we know it's on camera, so we're going to be going a little faster. We're going to make this more impressive. But the boat is, it's a good, stable, easy turning, quiet, fast catamaran.